want to welcome you all. I mean, what can I say? A lot.
There's a huge amount to discuss.
There is a huge amount. And the first question is this election over? No. Not by a long shot. No, I don't think it's over. Despite what Joe Scarborough said this morning on Morning Joe. But there is, well, he's come around from where he started. But he basically said that, Trump was self-imploding. And of course, there's now a lot of conversation about, whether the candidate is all there, all of that. So anyway, we're not going to go there. But I did want to welcome you. I mean, is this the greatest show on earth or what? It is. Every time you think that we couldn't possibly see another something jumps up. So today, I want to cover, in no particular order, but I thought we'd start by getting your feedback on the conventions. I mean, that was what this delay was. Where are we? What's happened? What about the VPs? We don't hear their names very often. That's not unusual. They're out there somewhere doing their thing. I want to talk about demographics, the swing states, turnout, the media, the Electoral College. We could have a tie, not a great chance, but it could happen. External events, unforced errors. Boy, we got a lot of those. And I think we could see a lot more. External events are attacks, unfortunately. We talked about that in our last session before we adjourned. And unfortunately, in both the United States and abroad, we've seen those, and we certainly could see more. Voter fraud and intimidation. But let's start off with your impressions of the conventions, and let's start in the order that they were done. Before we do this, I think there is one important point I want to make to you. I don't know if you've picked this up, but these conventions were held very early this year. They were held in July. The last time we had conventions in July was
1960.
1960. Kennedy and Nixon. So why, for 50 some odd years, they've been in August, and late in August usually. What was the reason, do you think, why the parties decided to have them in July?
The Olympics.
Well, that's one possibility.
I think to cut back on the infighting within the party.
Okay, that's another possibility. But the most important reason was money. Because they can't raise money for the candidates, on certain types of money, until they are officially nominated. So, Rance Priebus said back many, many months ago, we're going to have our convention in July so we can raise as much money as we can between the convention and the election. Not to be outdone, the Democrats said, well, we'll be right behind you. So let's start. We don't need to go through every day. I think I saw a statistic that said during the two conventions there were 204 speeches. How many of you saw every one of those speeches? How many of you saw any of those speeches? I think 73 on the Republican side and 101 on the Democratic side. Let's talk first then about the Republican convention. What your thoughts? Things that surprised you, things that you expected. Any comments?
You have your.
I was going to say that I was shocked at how few leaders of the Republican Party were at the convention, or if they were there for one day and then left. I mean, there was no. That's why the speeches were less, because he couldn't get anybody to speak for him.
So the next kind of major thing I think that happened was the speech from Mrs. Trump, which turned into its own cause célèbre when somebody picked up several paragraphs from a speech that had been given by another First Lady not all that long ago. Let's move on to the Democratic Convention. There were more speeches. I think the press seemed to feel it was better organized. There were certainly some people who were unhappy there, the Sanders supporters.
Right.
What about, let's talk for a moment about Sanders and that group. What's your take on how that came off at the convention? One good thing, I think, that happened at both conventions was that the possible violence, particularly outside the arenas, never really got beyond the control of the police. And that's, I think, something for which everybody should be very careful, because that possibility certainly existed. So, but what about, I mean, Bernie made, I think, the first night, I think it was the first night, made a speech in which he was, very upbeat about supporting Hillary. He said all the right things,
Right.
I think. But there were a lot of his delegates there and others who weren't too happy. And they indicated that throughout the convention. So where are we there? Are these people going to vote for Hillary?
I think they handled it very well. I was really impressed with
the
Democratic Party and
Uh-huh.
the convention itself. I mean, they had a definite right to be there. They had a right to speak their mind. They let them do it. They handled it well. They respected them. And even at the end, when Bernie said to them, we show what we can do. Now let's go behind Hillary. And a few of them, it was interesting. Some of them had said that they would go along with whatever Bernie said. But then when he said that, let's go along with Hillary, they said we can't do that. It was just, but that was like a 10%. I think it's 10% of the Bernie coalition walked out.
Yeah.
And that was it. So 10% is not. I mean, if it's only 10% that walks away, that's a good number for the Democrats and Hillary.
So did you see during the course of a number of the speeches on the succeeding nights, including the one that Hillary gave, but others, the TV would focus on Bernie.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't get the feeling, there were no big smiles
No.
coming from that direction. And, I don't know, what is his role going to be at this point? Is he going to get out on the campaign trail? I don't know the answer to that question, but it seems to me that there are places where he could be very helpful. We don't need him they don't need him in Vermont, but there are other places where they could use him. And I haven't heard anything about what the plans are. As to what his people are going to do, there is still, I think, some question. We'll get, Bob, to this question of, 10%. If that's a real 10%, that could be a serious number of votes. Trump yesterday refused to endorse McCain and Ryan and Kelly Ayotte, and you know, they're still going blithely along. It's very interesting to me. There are more Republicans, historically, who have supported these trade pacts than Democrats. When NAFTA was passed, it was passed by the Republicans. Not by, I mean, there were Democrats who supported it, but it was passed by it was George H.W. Bush who basically negotiated. It was Clinton who finally signed it, but it was a Republican Congress that passed it. Is Hillary running for a third term for President Obama?
No, she's a different person.
And if she is, or if that's the way it's perceived, then how does that affect her chances for the election? So let's talk about that, because I think that's very important. And you'll remember that in a prior class, we talked about this difficulty of getting someone from the same party elected president 3 terms in a row. Now we know the same person can't be elected 3 terms in a row, because after FDR did it, some years later, there was a constitutional amendment that prevented it. But if we look back in history, getting a party to hold the White House 3 terms in a row is a very unusual situation. Since the creation of the 2 major parties in 1856, that goes back before any of us, no party has ever won 6 out of 6 popular votes in the next elections, or 6 out of 7 in the next 7 elections. No party has ever done that. Now, the Democrats have now won 5 of the last 6, because Al Gore did get more popular votes than Mr. Bush. So you have 2 Clinton, you have Gore, and you have 2 Obama. That's 5. So if Hillary were to win, it would be the first time in our history that one party has taken the popular vote 6 out of 7 times. I think that's can't be ignored. Before 2012, no president since 1856, we go back to that date because that's when the Republican and Democratic parties were separately formed, had won a second term with fewer popular votes than in the first term, or with a smaller percentage of the popular vote than in the first term. No president had ever won a second term with fewer popular votes than he got in the first term, or with a smaller percentage of the popular vote. Obama did both. He got fewer popular votes, and he got a smaller percentage, and he got fewer electoral votes. And only one other president who ran for re-election got fewer electoral votes: Woodrow Wilson. So that's yet another take on what our history has shown. Obama's approval rating is hovering around 50%. And that's pretty good for somebody who's coming to the end, particularly given what he's been through. But according to those same polls, almost 70% of the country thinks that we're on the wrong track, whatever that means. We're going in the wrong direction. So I'm not sure how we, and of course Congress has an 80% disapproval rating. I don't know how it's even at 80, it should be at 8. But, you know, so how do we kind of deal with these apparently opposing tensions in the country? I think we know and understand that historically the idea of having two parties who swing like a pendulum back and forth has been a positive thing, so that one party does not basically stay in power for long periods of time. And I think most of us would agree that that has been a positive trend. But how will, with this background, statistically, is it a good thing for Hillary to run on Obama's coattails? And if she doesn't do that, how does she distinguish herself from what Obama may or may not have done in a way that is going to appeal to not just to Democratic voters, because we know that there aren't enough Democratic voters to elect her, just as we know there aren't enough Republican voters to elect the GOP candidate. It is the independent voters who will make these choices. You know, recently a note appeared in the paper, somewhere buried in a column, that Mr. Trump had forgiven his debt to the campaign, which was $50 million. But in order to forgive that debt, he has to do more than say, I'm going to forgive it. He's got to file papers with the Federal Election Commission. To the best of my knowledge, he's filed no such papers. And my guess is that he will not file those papers prior to the election. That his decision about whether he's going to forgive this debt may rest on other factors. I don't, of course, know that for a fact, but forgiving $50 million is a considerable sum. And of course, that would really, I mean, that would be a real blow to the party, because for them, $50 million is a lot of money that they would then have to repay to him. So I think that goes to, you know, is another piece of that point that you mentioned. And I don't know how closely you followed this, but, you know, he has a foundation. There's actually a Donald J. Trump Foundation, and then there's a foundation for Eric Trump. The other kids, to the best of my knowledge, don't have separate foundations. So one of the reasons that he doesn't want to release his tax returns, one of the reasons is clearly the fact that he's, I'm sure, the cheapest billionaire that ever existed, that he doesn't give, you know, given the assets, he gives virtually nothing to charity. And if you go and look at the foundation records, which you can on certain websites, he hasn't made a personal contribution to the foundation in 7 to 10 years. Other people have made, not family people, other people have made contributions to the foundation. And that money has been used to fund grants from the Donald J. Trump Foundation. The Eric Trump Foundation, which I looked up just the other day, and at one point he said that he had contributed millions to St. Jude's Hospital, I don't remember which one. In fact, the Eric Trump Foundation, it's Eric, I think, who runs the golf courses and that part of their business. And what he does every year is to run a golf tournament at the golf course in the DC area that they own. And people make substantial contributions to the foundation to play in this tournament. And then most of that money is in fact donated to St. Jude's Hospital. It's a single event, and it does generate about $1 million a year for St. Jude's. But again, this is small potatoes for people who have these kinds of assets. If you look, for example, at, we were talking about Warren Buffett. There's a group of billionaires who have pledged to donate at least 50%, but some, like Buffett, are donating 98% or more of their assets to charity, have actually pledged to do so. Trump was asked not long ago why he hadn't joined that group of billionaires. And his answer was, a remarkable, well, I have a big family, and I want my companies to go on forever, and, I can't afford, basically, to donate any more of my money to charity. So I think that all of this is part of this persona. And I think the whole business of, I thought Buffett's calling him out on the tax returns was a terrific tour de force, which of course we'll never see, because he's not going to release those tax returns. Among other things, I'm sure, not only doesn't he give any money to charity, he hasn't paid any taxes. And worst of all, the most important thing of all, is that he's going to be embarrassed in front of his billionaire friends as to what his assets really are.
Right.
Because they're small potatoes compared to, certainly compared to Warren Buffett and Mike Bloomberg. Those guys have 10, 20, Buffett has 100 times more assets. And if you look back to the beginning, everyone has been wrong from the beginning. So that's not a good record when you're trying to, predict forward. One of Winston Churchill's best lines, I always thought, was, I always try to prophecy after the event. I'm much more successful at doing it. And I think that's exactly correct. So I think we need to pay attention to that. Well, on a specific date, I think it's January 6th, 2017, those ballots are carried in 2 boxes. There are a couple of wonderful pictures that you can, if you go online, you can find, by Senate pages into the House of Representatives, where the House meets, and the only other people allowed in the chamber are members of the Senate or members of the staff. No, but the public is not allowed. And they open these boxes, which are divided by, from Alabama to whatever, alphabetically, and then from X to Wyoming. And they read off the number of electors for the candidates, for the GOP candidate and the Democratic candidate. And if there is an objection, and occasionally there has been an objection, not often, they then, first of all, the objection has to be in writing, and it has to be signed by a member of the House and a member of the Senate. And that's only happened several times. Barbara Boxer actually signed an objection back in 2012. But it's rare that that happens. And then what has to happen is that, depending upon the state and what the objection is, the Senate and or the House have to decide amongst them what they're going to do with those objections. Are they going to uphold it, or are they going to deny it? And they have the final say. Well, long story short, they go through this process, and at the end, they declare that there are X number of electors for the GOP and Y number of electors for the Democrats. Well, we've had, I hope that this this has been, at least in some way, worth waiting for. You know,
How we got to this point.
boy, I hope to see many of you there. Thanks so much.
Thank you.